So I've had a small problem, and the problem is my wheelchair didn't charge. I charged it for 6 hours yesterday, and I guess something was loose in the charger, and it thought it was charging, but it actually wasn't. I'm currently trying to charge it again to see if it even works, or if I need to, get the engineers out. I don't know how I'm going to get to campus for my booked room in an hour. And yeah, that's where we are, and this is very annoying. I think the thing that was most frustrating about finding that Mithal hadn't charged, or at least that she'd lost her charge, was that it had taken so very much to get myself to the point that I was ready to go to campus and really get working on these problems anyway. I know I talked in my last video about how hard I found my last supervision and how hard I was finding dealing with these questions, and I'm going to go into what those questions are later in my video, but what you're not seeing here is the gaps, the days that passed where I was overwhelmed or my pain was flaring and I was just so stressed dealing with this issue with the battery on my wheelchair, and it took so much for me just to get to this point you're seeing here, which is where I was initially taking those questions from my supervision and from previous notes I'd taken and really honing them down into a plan for what will become the opening to my chapter. And that's the thing, it takes me so much to get to a certain point that then when something goes wrong, it's just the worst. But the good news is that she did turn out to be okay, and I did, in fact, eventually make it back to campus. Well, it took a little longer than I'd hoped, but I am here, and I am working. This room is wildly echoey, so I apologise if there's wild echo on this video. It's now Monday. I first tried to do this on Friday, but my wheelchair was completely out of charge and then wouldn't charge, and it was all very worrying. We are now here, and I'm on campus, as you can see. So I'm gonna be working on the plan that I started on Thursday for the chapter, where I took all of the stuff that had been talked about in my supervision, and I turned it into kind of a plan. Essentially what I want to start writing is the introduction. So I've taken all the questions that I had and I've divided them into major questions and like lesser questions. So what I mean is major questions is things that are going to be like fundamental to the chapter, and then lesser questions are like things I will answer within those like wider groups. But I want to, at minimum, introduce all of these questions at the start. So I'm kind of working on my introduction, but it's going to be combined with a bit of a literature review. If you're in the humanities, you're used to this, but for anyone who isn't, a lot of disciplines think about a literature review as a self-contained thing. When you are in the humanities, kind of your whole thesis is a literature review in part, because it's not like you're doing some kind of scientific research where you go, here is all of the existing literature on HIV, for example, and then here is my experiment and my investigation, and you don't separate it like that. You might well have a literature review section either at the start of your thesis as a whole or at the start of each chapter. I often tend to start chapters like that, where I've got like, here's, an idea of what's out there, and I will to an extent be doing that here. But then you continue to literature review throughout the whole of the rest of the chapter, so it's kind of intermingled in that sense. So yeah, I've split it up into these two things, and honestly what I want to do, and the reason I've booked this room one, it's more comfortable and I feel more comfortable being in an enclosed room rather than a big open plan library space. Also, I can talk in here, so I can talk to the camera. But I basically want to go through and deep dive into each of these questions in terms of what's out there already. Oh, excuse me, making hissing noises with my much necessary caffeine. So yeah, I want to sort of look at these in real detail, each of them. And that might mean going back and forth, getting different sources, and this from logs, so it's much easier to do that. We have little study corrals here in the library as well, which I've used before, but Mythal doesn't really fit in them. I can show you Mythal. I'll turn this round. There she is over there. So yeah, I can, you know, she doesn't fit that well in a study corral. Yeah, I'm gonna start by doing all of that. So, and I wanted to talk aloud because that helps me. So I'm gonna go through all of the major questions. So for context, this is in the thesis. This is my second chapter. It's the third one I'm writing, because I didn't write them in order. So this comes after the video games chapter, and my video games chapter looks a lot at what immersion is and the tools that are used in video games to create immersion and give people the embodied and affective experience of madness, or close to it. So basically my first major question is, look, we've seen video games are immersive, but to what extent are visual novels interactive and or immersive? And then specifically, what do we mean by interactive or immersive? How can we use visual novels to intervene in the question of what interactive and immersive mean, in terms of madness especially, and also does it matter what the difference is, you know, as long as we define what we mean, is there a problem? And one of the reasons that I wanted to include this conundrum is that when I was researching, I found a theorist who had made a really specific delineation between interactive and immersive, in a way that I could appreciate but didn't necessarily agree with. So I kind of want to look at that. So one of the things I will go and see if I can grab today is their work, and I'm probably going to start with that bit, and I want to look at, because I'm doing interdisciplinary work, I can go and look at, hey, what do other fields think interactive means or think immersive means, you know. And so that's what I'm going to start working on, just to give you an idea of some of my other major questions. They're things like why visual novels in relation to madness, then what visual novels am I looking at and why, how does madness feature in them, and what work or purpose is madness doing or serving in them, and then what identity is in terms of mad studies, and then that's where I want to bring in thoughts about plural identities, and that community and so on. And then I've got a whole list of lesser questions, so we'll get to those later. But yeah, to start with, I'm going to go look for that theorist that I had read about, and see if I can start by reading some of their stuff and seeing, you know, more detail around the stuff I've already seen of their idea. Alright, so I wasn't able to find the actual collection that this is from, but I have found some other writing by this guy, so I'm going to read some of those and see if I can find him talking about the same theory. That's the plan. Alright, so... Oh, take this out so I can hear myself think. Things I've learned. This guy doesn't like hypertext novels. He really doesn't. So I'm reading the work of David Esmail, or D. Esmail as he's known at points, who is a 1990s, early 2000s, I think he's still active, but that's where the bulk of this work that I'm reading is from. Theorist, literary theorist who was looking at hypertext novels. Now, I originally had hypertext novels included in this chapter. I took them out because I didn't have room. But I think hypertext theory is still quite applicable to visual novels in terms of them incorporating a multimedia element alongside text. They don't do so to the same extent that hypertext novels do, necessarily. They might be more similar, but you know they've got a lot of similarities, and yeah, this guy really doesn't. He doesn't like. For someone who has written a lot about hypertext novels, he's definitely hate writing. But there's some useful stuff in. I just read an article that he co-wrote on reading hypertext novels, and it was quite useful. It gave me some other useful things. They did a study of getting some people to read a hypertext novel, and I've got a really cool quote about people feeling that they had control and agency over the choices. So he's not like blindly hating hypertext novels either, but he is really strongly arguing that by including the multimedia element, so in the case of visual novels, by including the visual, you remove the interaction that is the reader imagining what is depicted to them in text. I have some issues with this, namely, like, if you're one of those people who can't imagine a visual, then this theory doesn't include you. It's not inclusive of you at all. And I have at least one friend who is like that, and I'm like, well, no, he's a very imaginative person who just can't picture it. So you know, how does this theory interact with that is one thing I was thinking. I also was thinking about how what the images in visual novels are makes a big difference. So thinking of Slay the Princess, for example, the art style is very scratchy pen and pencil in a mostly kind of monochromatic look, or very, very low saturation look. And you are given like quite simple images a lot of the time, and there's room for imagination. Or in Song of Sire, you get like single static cropped images. There's a lot more movement in the visuals in Slay the Princess than there is in Song of Sire. And you're left to imagine like the action that's occurring and so forth. You just get I'm thinking of the bit where one of the characters is at the bottom of a well, and you just see the like circle of light with the either side, and you're left to imagine the rest of it. And it's only ever visual. You're still imagining the cold and the damp, you know, all of these other senses. You've got more than one sense. What is unfortunate is I really think I need the collection where he does talk about interactivity and immersivity, and I don't have any access to that. It's not open access, so I might put in a request for it with the librarians, which is a thing I can do, and see if they can get me a PDF of it. There is a PDF out there, I just don't have access to it. So see if they can get that on document delivery for me. Yeah, I'll just keep going and I'll come back to you later. As you could probably hear in that last clip, my brain was really starting to get tired at that point. I had done some really good work, I'd done a lot of reading, I started to start writing things as well to bring together the stuff I was finding and that I already had. I brought in some bits from my original write-up where I was just describing what a visual novel is and explaining all of that. I put my document delivery request in, not without its difficulties, because the website refused to let me put it in the proper way, and I had to email them manually and say, I'm so sorry, can you sort this for me? Which they are doing, because the librarians are wonderful. And then that was kind of it. I started to realise that I wanted to talk about the emotional work that goes into reading and responding to things as well. So I picked up a book that I've used before for this that I really like, which is Deeper Than Reason by Jennifer Robinson. And that is something that I've then got ready for when I go back to things later in the week. I have a bunch of appointments, so I'm gonna be less able to work on stuff through the rest of this week, but I'm gonna try getting to it bits and pieces here and there as much as I can. And yeah, we keep on going, even when it's really hard. So thank you for following along, and I will see you again very soon.